For 10 years, the Korean Mafia boss's daughter lived in silence. Every specialist said the same thing. Irreversible. Her father built an empire across 2 continents, commanded men with a whisper, made problems disappear. But he couldn't buy his daughter a single sound. Then a black widow in the cereal aisle saw what million-dollar doctors missed, and what she discovered in that child's ear changed everything. Don't be like the 52% of viewers who watch without subscribing. Make a difference. Hit that subscribe button right now, because every subscription helps us bring more incredible true stories like this one. Stories that need to be told. Stories that will change how you see the world. Your subscription matters. It keeps these stories alive. Now, let's dive in. They called Park Sang-ho the ghost of Koreatown. Not because he hid. Because those who crossed him disappeared. Korean Mafia boss. Criminal empire stretching from Seoul to Los Angeles. Penthouse fortress of marble and bulletproof glass. Armed guards at every entrance. More power than most men dream of in 10 lifetimes. But his daughter, Seo-jin, was born deaf. 10 years old. Never heard a sound. Park Sang-ho tried everything. Seoul National University Hospital. Specialists in Tokyo. Consultants in Switzerland who charged $50,000 per visit. They ran scans, tests, experimental treatments. All of them said the same thing. Permanent. Accept it. Move on. But Park Sang-ho couldn't accept it because Seo-jin was all he had left. His wife died bringing that girl into the world. Every morning he watched his daughter wake up in silence. Every night he signed "I love you" with his hands, knowing she'd never hear the words. The most powerful man in Koreatown felt utterly, devastatingly helpless. Until one Saturday morning in Los Angeles. Park Sang-ho's penthouse sat on the 42nd floor of the Wilshire Grand Tower, the tallest building west of the Mississippi. Floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass. Italian marble imported from Carrara. Security cameras covering every angle. 6 armed guards on rotation, 24 hours a day. The kind of place where even the air felt expensive, filtered through systems that cost more than most people's homes. But money couldn't buy sound. Every morning started the same way. Park Sang-ho would wake at 5:30, shower in silence, dress in Brioni suits that cost $12,000. By 6:15, he'd be at the breakfast table, watching his daughter arrange her cereal piece by piece, her world locked in permanent quiet. Seo-jin never rushed, never made noise, because she couldn't hear herself exist. They'd communicate in sign language, simple conversations that broke Park Sang-ho's heart every single time. "Good morning, Father. Did you sleep well? What will we do today?" Her hands moved with grace, forming words in the air that should have been spoken aloud. 10 years old, and she'd never heard laughter, never heard music, never heard her father say her name. Park Sang-ho ruled an empire worth $300 million. He controlled territory from Koreatown to Long Beach, operations spanning from Seoul to Manila to Los Angeles. Men twice his size feared him. Rival organizations knew better than to test him. In 2019, a Russian crew tried to muscle into his gambling operation. 3 weeks later, they vanished. No bodies, no witnesses, just silence. That's what Park Sang-ho did. He made problems disappear, but he couldn't make his daughter's deafness disappear. 10 years ago, his world ended and began in the same moment. His wife, Ji-yeon, went into labor 3 weeks early. Complications. They rushed her to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, the best hospital in Los Angeles. Park Sang-ho had 12 men secure the entire floor. He'd threatened administrators, demanded the top surgeons, promised anything, everything. None of it mattered. Ji-yeon died on the operating table. Massive hemorrhaging. The doctors tried for 43 minutes to save her. Park Sang-ho stood outside the door, surrounded by his guards. The most powerful man in Koreatown, completely powerless. When they brought Seo-jin to him, wrapped in pink blankets, alive and perfect. He couldn't even smile. Because Ji-yeon would never hold her daughter, never sing to her, never see her first steps. And then, 3 days later, the doctors delivered the second blow. Seo-jin failed every hearing test. Profound sensorineural deafness, they called it. Irreversible, born without the ability to hear. Park Sang-ho had lost his wife and gained a daughter who would never know her mother's voice, never hear the stories Ji-yeon had planned to tell her. Something broke in Park Sang-ho that day. The cold enforcer, the man who'd ordered executions without flinching, crumbled. He'd spent 20 years building power, accumulating wealth, commanding fear, and all of it meant nothing. His wife was gone. His daughter lived in silence. No amount of money could change either fact. But he tried anyway. He flew Seo-jin to Seoul National University Hospital when she was 6 months old. The top audiologists in South Korea ran every test imaginable. Nothing. They tried experimental treatments, genetic testing, cochlear implant consultations. The specialists shook their heads. Too severe. Won't work. Accept it. Park Sang-ho didn't accept it. He took her to Tokyo Medical Center, then to specialists in Singapore, then to Switzerland, where doctors charged $50,000 per consultation. He threatened some. He bribed others. He promised funding for entire research departments if they could just fix his daughter. They all said the same thing. Permanent nerve damage. Structural abnormalities. Medical science had limits. Park Sang-ho spent over $3 million chasing hope. He consulted with 17 different specialists across 3 continents. Some were sympathetic. Some were condescending. All of them failed. And with each failure, the weight grew heavier. The guilt more crushing. He'd failed Ji-yeon by not saving her. He was failing Seo-jin by not fixing her. Every night, Park Sang-ho would stand in Seo-jin's doorway, watching her sleep. She'd curl up under her blankets, her dark hair spread across the pillow, completely peaceful. And he'd wonder what she dreamed about. Did she dream in silence? Did she imagine sounds she'd never heard? He'd sign "I love you" in the dark, knowing she couldn't see it. Knowing the words existed only in his hands, never in her ears. The penthouse became a prison. All that marble and bulletproof glass, all those armed guards, all that power. It meant nothing. Park Sang-ho could make grown men beg for mercy. He could destroy businesses with a phone call. He controlled more money than most people could imagine, but he couldn't give his daughter the one thing she needed. He couldn't give her sound, so they lived together in their fortress of silence. Father and daughter, criminal and innocent, both trapped by something no amount of power could overcome. Park Sang-ho would handle his business during the day, shipments, territory disputes, meetings where violence hung in the air like smoke. And then he'd come home to Seo-jin, and all that ruthlessness would melt away. She was the only person who saw him as something other than the ghost of Koreatown. She was the only person he'd ever loved more than he loved power. And every single day, he failed her. The weight of that failure sat on his chest like concrete. 10 years of watching his daughter navigate a silent world. 10 years of knowing that somewhere, somehow, there had to be an answer. 10 years of coming up empty. Until one Saturday morning, when everything changed in a grocery store cereal aisle. Sade Thompson's alarm went off at 4:47 a.m. on a Saturday. Not 4:45. Not 5 o'clock. Exactly 4:47, because those 13 extra minutes meant the difference between catching the first bus and being late for her hospital shift. She rolled out of bed in the dark, her body moving on autopilot, muscle memory from years of military discipline. Wake up, get dressed, black coffee, go. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom in a building where the elevator worked maybe 3 days a week, but it was hers. paid for with paychecks from 2 jobs and the life insurance from a husband who died 3 years ago in a place she'd never wanted him to go. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, Army combat medic, killed by an IED outside Kandahar when his convoy stopped to help wounded civilians. He died doing exactly what he'd trained Saad to do: save lives first, ask questions later. She still kept his photo on the kitchen counter, uniform pressed, smile wide, that same smile that convinced her to marry him 2 weeks before his second deployment. People told her to move on, put the photo away, start dating again. She was only 31, still young, still had time. They didn't understand. She wasn't stuck in the past, she was honoring a promise. Marcus made her swear that if anything happened to him, she'd keep helping people, keep using her training, keep being the medic who gave a damn. So she worked, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Mercy General Hospital's reception desk. Not the job she trained for, but the job that paid the bills. Weekends, she picked up retail shifts at Target, folding clothes and restocking shelves and smiling at customers who treated her like she was invisible. 2 jobs, 70 hours a week. Enough to cover rent, groceries, and the student loans from nursing school she'd had to drop out of when Marcus died. The bus ride to the hospital took 43 minutes. Sade spent them staring out the window, watching Los Angeles wake up. She used to love this city. The energy, the diversity, the way every neighborhood felt like a different country. Now it just felt exhausting, a place where everyone was hustling, grinding, trying to survive. At the hospital, she sat behind a desk and directed patients to the right departments, smiled, answered phones, pretended she wasn't qualified to do so much more. She had 7 years of combat medical training. She'd treated gunshot wounds in forward operating bases, performed emergency tracheotomies in the back of Humvees, kept soldiers alive long enough to reach surgical units. But here, she scheduled appointments and filed insurance paperwork. The flashbacks came without warning. Middle of her shift, and suddenly she wasn't at the reception desk anymore. She was back in Ramadi, 2019, inside a dusty medical tent where the temperature hit 115 degrees and the smell of blood never left your uniform. She'd see a patient walk through the hospital doors, and her mind would replace them with a 19-year-old private whose legs were shredded by shrapnel. She'd hear a code blue announcement over the intercom, and she'd be back in that tent, compressions on a chest that wouldn't respond. Marcus beside her saying, "Keep going, Sade, don't stop, we don't stop." She learned to breathe through it. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. A technique Marcus taught her during her first deployment when the anxiety got so bad she couldn't sleep. After her hospital shift ended at 2 p.m., Sade had exactly 90 minutes before her weekend retail shift started at Target. Not enough time to go home. Just enough time to grab food and sit in her car, eating in silence, scrolling through her phone without really seeing anything. On this particular Saturday, she was tired, bone-deep tired, the kind that sleep didn't fix. She'd worked 6 days straight, covering for a coworker who called in sick. Her feet hurt, her back hurt, everything hurt, but she couldn't afford to call in, couldn't afford to slow down. Because slowing down meant thinking. Thinking meant remembering. Remembering meant feeling the full weight of 3 years without Marcus. 3 years of sleeping alone. 3 years of making decisions by herself. 3 years of wondering if she was living or just surviving. She pulled into the Target parking lot at 3:52 p.m., 8 minutes early. Enough time to change into her red polo shirt and khakis in the employee bathroom, splash water on her face, and clock in with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The store was busy. Saturdays always were. Families shopping for birthday parties, college students buying dorm supplies, couples debating which brand of cereal to buy like it was the most important decision of their lives. Sade restocked shelves in the grocery section, soup cans, pasta boxes, rice bags, mindless work that let her brain shut off. That's what she needed, to shut off. Stop thinking about bills and loneliness and the empty space in her bed and the career she'd abandoned and the man who'd promised her forever but only gave her 7 years. She was arranging cereal boxes when her manager approached, asking her to cover the health and beauty section because someone else had left early. Sade nodded, said sure, grabbed her cart and headed toward the other side of the store. That's when everything changed. Because in aisle 7, near the imported snacks and organic cereals, she saw them. A little girl with long dark hair. A man in an expensive suit surrounded by other men who moved like trained security. And something about the way that little girl touched her ear made Saad stop walking, made her training kick in, made her remember why Marcus died, and why she was still here. Saturday morning, 9:47 a.m. The kind of California sunshine that makes everything look too bright, too clean, too normal. Park Sang-ho didn't do normal, but for Seo Jin, he tried. The black SUV convoy pulled into the parking lot of Arahan Market in West Hollywood. 3 vehicles, 6 bodyguards, 1 mafia boss, 1 10-year-old girl who just wanted her favorite honey butter chips. This was dangerous. Park Sang-ho knew it. Every public appearance was a calculated risk. Enemies didn't take vacations. Rivals didn't respect grocery runs. But Seo Jin had touched his sleeve that morning, signed the words for shopping and together, and he couldn't say no. Not to her. Never to her. The bodyguards moved first. 2 swept the entrance. 2 positioned at the perimeter. 2 stayed close, their hands never far from concealed weapons. Park Sang-ho had survived 2 decades in the underworld by trusting no one and preparing for everything. Seo Jin held his hand as they walked through the automatic doors. She was wearing her favorite lavender cardigan, the one with the little flowers on the pockets. Her long dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail. To anyone else, she looked like any other kid excited about snacks. But Park Sang-ho saw what others didn't. The way she tilted her head slightly to the left. The way her free hand kept drifting to her right ear. The small wince she tried to hide. She'd been doing that more lately, touching her ear. He'd asked her about it in sign language. She'd signed back that it was fine, just a little uncomfortable. The doctors had examined her 3 weeks ago during her routine checkup. Nothing unusual, they said. Just part of her condition. Just part of her condition. Those words haunted him. They moved through the produce section. Organic apples stacked in perfect pyramids. $70 bottles of cold-pressed juice. This place was absurd, overpriced, the kind of store that charged $8 for artisanal water. But it was close to the penthouse, relatively secure, and Seo Jin liked the sample station near the deli counter. Park Sang-ho watched his daughter pick up a mango, examine it with the careful attention she gave everything. She was so present in her silent world, so observant. She noticed things others missed, the way people moved, the way their faces changed, the subtle shifts in body language that spoke louder than words ever could. She touched her ear again, winced, tried to hide it. His jaw tightened. He would call the specialists on Monday, demand another examination, fly in someone from Johns Hopkins if necessary. Money meant nothing. Results were everything. Across the store, near the cereal aisle, Sade Thompson was barely holding it together. 22 hours. That's how long she'd been awake. Night shift at Cedars Sinai reception desk had bled into Saturday morning. She'd gone home, showered in cold water because the hot wasn't working again, changed into jeans and a clean t-shirt, and forced herself back out because the refrigerator was empty and her body needed food even if her brain wanted sleep. Coffee wasn't working anymore. She was beyond coffee. She was in that strange place where exhaustion feels like floating, where the world seems slightly unreal, where you move through space like you're underwater. She pushed her cart past overpriced organic everything, trying to remember what was on her list. Eggs, bread, something green. Her mind was fog. The store was crowded for a Saturday morning. Wealthy people buying $20 smoothies and grass-fed butter. Influencers filming content near the superfood section. She didn't belong here. This place cost twice as much as Ralph's. But it was on her way home and she couldn't drive another mile. She rounded the corner into the produce section, her cart wheel squeaking. That's when she saw them. 6 men in dark suits, moving with military precision, not shopping, watching. Their eyes constantly scanning, hands positioned near their waists in that specific way that meant weapons. Professional security, high-level security. And in the center of that protective formation, a man in an expensive black suit holding the hand of a young girl in a lavender cardigan. Sade's exhaustion sharpened into alertness. Her army training never fully left. She knew danger when she saw it, knew power, knew the kind of men who moved through public spaces with private armies. She should look away, mind her business, get her groceries, and go home. But then she saw the girl touch her ear, the small, quick motion, the wince that followed, the way the child's hand lingered there for just a second before dropping back to her side. Saad froze. That gesture, that specific pattern, she'd seen it before. The girl touched her ear again, this time more deliberately, her small fingers pressing against the area just behind her earlobe. The pressure relief motion, the head tilt, the micro-expression of discomfort. Sade's medical training overrode her exhaustion. Her mind cataloged the signs automatically. Unilateral discomfort, repeated touching, pressure sensitivity, possible impaction, possible blockage, possible. The girl looked up at the man beside her, signed something with her hands. The man's face softened in a way that seemed impossible for someone who radiated that much controlled danger. He signed back, his movements gentle, practiced. Sign language. The child was deaf. But that gesture, that ear touching, that wasn't random. That wasn't nothing. Sade's heart started pounding. She gripped her shopping cart tighter. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away. This wasn't her business. These weren't her people. That man with the private security detail and the cold eyes was not someone you approached uninvited. But the girl touched her ear again, and Saad knew. She knew what no one else was seeing. The question wasn't what she knew. The question was what she was going to do about it. Saad Thompson was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that comes from working a double shift at Cedars-Sinai, followed by 4 hours restocking shelves at Target, followed by exactly 0 hours of sleep. Her shopping cart squeaked as she turned into the produce section of the upscale Whole Foods on Wilshire, mentally calculating whether she could afford the organic strawberries or if she'd have to settle for the regular ones again. Her paycheck said regular. Her pride said organic. Her empty fridge said, just pick something and get home. She reached for a bag of apples when she saw the girl. 10 years old, maybe. Korean. Long dark hair, expensive clothes, lavender cardigan that probably cost more than Sade's entire outfit. Pretty kid. But that wasn't what made Sade pause. It was the way the girl touched her ear. Right hand, right ear. Not a casual scratch, not an absent-minded gesture. Frantic, deliberate, like she was trying to dig something out that wouldn't come free. Sade's hand froze on the apple bag. The girl tilted her head. Hard to the right, pressed the heel of her palm against her ear canal. Winced. A tiny, almost imperceptible flinch that crossed her face before she composed herself again. Then she did it again. Touch, tilt, wince. Touch, tilt, wince. Sade's medical training didn't ask permission before it kicked in. It just happened. Like a switch flipping in her brain. She watched the angle of that head tilt. 45 degrees, maybe more. The girl was trying to relieve pressure, trying to let gravity do what her fingers couldn't. And that wince, that specific, sharp pain response, that wasn't nerve damage, that wasn't sensorineural hearing loss, that was physical, mechanical. Something was in there. She'd seen this before. Ramadi, forward operating base. July heat that made your skin feel like it was melting off your bones. A young private, 22 years old, came into the medical tent convinced he'd lost his hearing from an IED blast 3 days prior. He was terrified. Couldn't hear his squad leader's orders. Couldn't hear incoming fire warnings. Thought his military career was over before it started. Every other medic had checked him, assumed blast trauma, started paperwork for medical discharge. But Sadeh had watched him do exactly what this little girl was doing now. Touch his ear, tilt his head, try to shake something loose that wouldn't move. So she'd grabbed an otoscope, looked inside, and found a massive impaction. Not from the blast. From months of desert sand, sweat, and wax building up into a solid plug that had finally sealed his ear canal completely. 20 minutes of careful irrigation later, the kid could hear again. He'd cried. Actually cried. Said she'd saved his life. Sadeh's eyes tracked the little girl as she moved through the produce section. 6 men in dark suits surrounded her, 1 directly behind, 2 flanking, 3 scanning the perimeter. Professional, military-grade awareness. These weren't mall security guards. These were killers in tailored jackets. And in the center of them, casual as Sunday morning, stood a man who made every instinct in Saad's body scream danger. Park Sang-ho. She recognized him from the news, from whispered conversations at the hospital, the ghost of Koreatown, the man whose name you didn't say out loud unless you wanted problems. Korean Mafia boss, drug smuggling, money laundering, bodies that disappeared into the Pacific. Every law enforcement agency in California had a file on him. None of them could touch him. And his daughter was standing 15 feet away from Sadeh, in obvious pain, doing the exact same thing that Private and Ramadi had done. Sadeh's heart hammered against her ribs. She should walk away, should mind her business, should get her groceries and go home to her empty apartment and her empty bed and forget she ever saw anything. That was the smart play, the safe play, the play that kept her alive. But the girl touched her ear again, tilted her head, winced. Saad thought about Marcus, her husband, her partner, her best friend who'd died in a firefight in Kandahar 3 years ago because he'd run into enemy fire to pull a wounded soldier to safety. He could have stayed in cover, could have waited for backup, could have played it safe. But Marcus didn't play it safe when someone needed help. He played it right. Courage isn't the absence of fear, he used to tell her during training exercises, his voice steady even when mortars were landing close. It's doing what's right despite it. Sadeh watched the little girl sign something to her father, watched Park Sang-ho's face soften for just a moment before the mask came back, watched him sign back, his hands gentle despite the violence they'd committed. A father and daughter trapped in silence, surrounded by armed guards and fresh produce and absolutely no idea that the answer was right there, right inside that ear canal, fixable, treatable, simple. 10 years, Sayed thought. The news articles said the girl had been deaf for 10 years, millions of dollars spent. The world's best specialists consulted, and none of them had seen what Sadeh could see from 15 feet away in a grocery store on a Saturday morning. The girl touched her ear again. Sadeh made her decision. She abandoned her shopping cart in the middle of the produce section, straightened her shoulders, took a breath that tasted like fear and responsibility, and Marcus's voice echoing in her head. Then she started walking toward the most dangerous man in Los Angeles, knowing that every step could be her last, knowing that silence wasn't louder than suffering, knowing that some things were worth the risk. The bodyguards saw her coming. Hands moved toward concealed weapons. Park Sang-ho's eyes locked onto hers. Cold, calculating, measuring her for a body bag. Saad kept walking. Chapter 5. Ghosts and Echoes. Saadi's hand froze on the box of cereal. The girl touched her ear again. That same tilt of the head, that same wince. And suddenly Saade wasn't in Los Angeles anymore. She was in Ramadi. 2019. Forward Operating Base Justice. 118 degrees in the shade, and there was no shade. The medical tent smelled like antiseptic and sand and blood that wouldn't wash out of the canvas no matter how many times they tried. Specialist Marcus Webb sat on the exam table, 22 years old, Kansas farm boy. 3 months into his deployment, he kept saying the same thing over and over. "I can't hear, Doc. I can't hear anything." The blast had happened 4 days earlier. IED en route Michigan. Webb had been in the turret. The explosion threw him 8 feet. Traumatic brain injury, they said. Blast-related hearing loss, they said. Permanent damage to the auditory system. Accept it. Move on. He'd already been processed for medical discharge. Papers signed. Family notified. His war was over at 22, and silence would be his souvenir. But something bothered Sadie. Webb kept touching his right ear. Not both ears, just the right one. He tilted his head at a specific angle when he tried to listen, like he was searching for sound through a tunnel. She'd seen enough blast injuries to know they didn't work like that. Bilateral hearing loss, always. Both ears, symmetrical damage. This was different. She asked him to come back to the tent after evening formation. The other medics had already clocked out. The base was settling into its uneasy twilight routine, generators humming, distant sound of a helicopter somewhere over the Euphrates. Saade pulled out an otoscope. Nothing fancy, standard military issue. She looked into Webb's left ear first. Normal. Pink tissue. Clear canal. Then the right ear. She couldn't see his eardrum. The canal was completely blocked. Dark, impacted mass filling the entire space. She'd never seen anything like it. Not wax alone. Something else. She grabbed irrigation supplies, warm saline, a basin. Webb looked at her like she was crazy. "They already checked," he said. "5 doctors already checked." "They looked," Saade told him. "They didn't see." It took 40 minutes. Careful, gentle irrigation. The blockage was massive, compacted so deep she thought she might cause damage trying to remove it. But piece by piece it came out. Wax, yes. Years of impacted cerumen pressed hard as clay, but also sand. Desert sand driven deep into his ear canal by the blast's concussive force. And fragments. Tiny pieces of debris. The explosion hadn't destroyed his hearing. It had buried it. The moment the last piece cleared, Webb's eyes went wide. He could hear the generator, the helicopter, Sade's breathing, his own heartbeat. He started crying right there in the medical tent, this Kansas farm boy who'd been processing his discharge papers an hour earlier. "I can hear you," he kept saying. "Oh my God, I can hear you." Saadi reported it up the chain of command. Webb's discharge was reversed. The audiologist who'd cleared him was reprimanded. Webb finished his deployment, went home to Kansas, got married, sent Saade a photo of his daughter 2 years later, a child he could hear laughing, because Saade had looked when everyone else had stopped seeing. Standing in the cereal aisle of an upscale Los Angeles grocery store, Sade watched the Korean girl touch her ear again. That same angle, that same search for sound, the same desperation Webb had shown. And Saad felt it, the weight of the oath she'd taken a lifetime ago. First, do no harm. But also, do something. Do something when you can help, when you're the only one who sees it. She thought about Marcus Webb crying in that medical tent. She thought about the 5 doctors who'd looked but hadn't seen. She thought about her husband, Terrell, who used to tell her that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing what's right even when your hands are shaking. Especially when your hands are shaking. The bodyguards weren't subtle. 6 men in dark suits forming a perimeter around the Korean man and his daughter. The way they moved, the way they watched. Military precision. Threat assessment. These weren't private security guards hired for show. These were men who knew violence intimately. Men who'd done things that kept them awake at night. Or worse, men who slept just fine. And the man at the center, Park Sang-ho. Even without knowing his name, Sade could read the danger radiating off him like heat shimmer on desert asphalt. The way other shoppers gave him space. The way the store manager had appeared. Nervous, deferential, then disappeared. This was a man accustomed to power, to obedience, to getting what he wanted or removing what stood in his way. Approaching him could get her killed, probably would get her killed. The rational part of Sade's brain cataloged the risks, the bodyguards, the man's reputation, the fact that she was a black woman about to give unsolicited medical advice to one of the most dangerous men in Los Angeles, the fact that she had no backup, no authority, no protection. But the girl touched her ear again, and Sade saw Marcus Webb. She saw that impacted canal. She saw 10 years of unnecessary silence that could end with 40 minutes of careful work. She saw a father who'd spent millions searching for an answer that was probably sitting right there in his daughter's ear canal, overlooked by every expensive specialist on 3 continents. Sade's hands were shaking. She couldn't make them stop, but Terrell's voice was clear in her memory. Courage isn't the absence of fear. She put down the cereal box. She took a breath. She started walking toward the most dangerous man in the grocery store, and she prayed she'd live long enough to help his daughter hear. Sade's hands were shaking. She pretended to study the nutritional label on a cereal box, but her eyes kept drifting back to the man in the tailored black suit 30 feet away. Park Sang-ho. She'd seen his face before, not in person, but on the news. Local channels called him a person of interest. The Korean language papers were less subtle. They called him what he was, the ghost of Koreatown. She should walk away. She should finish her shopping, go home, take a shower, sleep for 12 hours like she'd planned. Her shift at the hospital had run 16 hours instead of 8. Her feet ached, her head pounded. She had groceries to buy, laundry to fold, a life to manage on her own because Marcus wasn't coming back to help her manage it. But the little girl kept touching her ear. Saad had watched her do it 7 times now. The same pattern. Right hand to right ear, fingers probing gently, then that tiny wince. The kind of wince you make when you're trying not to show pain. The kind of wince Sade had seen 1,000 times in field hospitals, in triage tents, in the back of transport vehicles racing across Iraqi desert roads. She knew that wince. She knew what it meant. The girl wasn't deaf, or at least she didn't have to be. Sade's medical training screamed at her. Impacted cerumen, foreign body obstruction, chronic otitis externa. Any of those could cause profound hearing loss. Any of those could be treated, fixed, reversed. She'd seen it in Ramadi with Corporal Jenkins, a 22-year-old kid from Ohio who thought an IED blast had destroyed his hearing. Turned out he had a massive wax impaction compacted by dust and debris. 30 minutes of careful irrigation and the kid could hear again. He'd cried. His squad leader had cried. Sade had gone back to her tent and cried too, because sometimes the wins mattered more than all the losses. This could be the same thing. This could be fixable. But Park Sang-ho wasn't a scared kid from Ohio. He was a crime lord with 6 bodyguards standing in a grocery store like they owned it. And maybe they did. Maybe Park Sang-ho owned half of Los Angeles for all Sade knew. Men like him owned things, territories, businesses, politicians. They made problems disappear. She could become a problem very quickly. Sade shifted her weight, her heart hammering against her ribs. The rational part of her brain was doing calculations. Risk versus reward. Her life versus a stranger's child. Self-preservation versus moral obligation. It was the kind of math she'd learned to do in combat, the kind of equation that kept you alive when everything around you wanted you dead. Walk away. That's what the equation said. Walk away. But there was another equation, a different kind of math, the kind Marcus had taught her during their last conversation before his deployment, sitting on their apartment balcony in the summer heat, his hand covering hers. He'd been nervous. She could always tell when he was nervous because he talked more, filled the silence with words like he was trying to leave her with enough to remember him by. Courage isn't the absence of fear, he'd said, watching the sun set over the city. It's doing what's right despite it. That's the only kind of courage that matters, Sade. The kind that costs you something. She'd held on to those words through his funeral, through the folded flag they handed her, through 3 years of waking up alone in a bed that still smelled like him some mornings, even though that was impossible. Marcus had died doing what was right. He'd thrown himself on a grenade to save his unit. 4 men went home to their families because her husband had done the math differently. He'd calculated that their lives mattered more than his fear, and now she was standing in a cereal aisle, afraid of a man in a suit, while a little girl suffered with something Sade could probably fix. What kind of math was that? The little girl touched her ear again, winced again, and something in Sade broke open, or maybe it clicked into place. She didn't know which. She just knew that Marcus would be ashamed of her if she walked away. She'd be ashamed of herself. She thought of her medical oath. First, do no harm. But there was another part people forgot. The part about using your knowledge for the benefit of the sick. About entering homes for the benefit of patients. About seeing and hearing things that should be kept private. Things like a Mafia boss shopping for groceries with his deaf daughter, trying to have a normal Saturday morning in a world that would never be normal for him. Sade had knowledge. She had training. She could see what others had missed, what apparently million-dollar specialists had overlooked or misdiagnosed or given up on. She could help, or she could die trying. The bodyguards were scanning the store constantly. Professional, efficient. They'd see her coming before she got within 10 feet. They'd intercept her. They'd put hands on weapons. Park Sang-ho would look at her with those cold eyes she'd seen in news footage, and he'd make a calculation of his own, threat or not, useful or disposable. Her hands were still shaking, but her feet were moving. Sade set down the cereal box. She straightened her spine. She took a breath. She thought of Marcus, of Corporal Jenkins, of every patient she'd ever saved and every patient she'd ever lost. She thought of the little girl's wince, the way she kept touching her ear like she was trying to dig out the silence with her bare hands. And Sade Thompson, widowed Army medic, exhausted single mother, woman who'd seen too much death and not enough miracles, made her decision. She would approach them. Whatever happened next, she would live with it, or she wouldn't. But she would not walk away. Sade's hands were shaking as she abandoned her shopping cart in the pasta aisle. Her legs felt heavy, like walking through wet concrete, every step toward the cereal section requiring a conscious decision not to turn around. She could still leave, walk away, go home, pretend she hadn't seen anything. but she had seen it. And now she couldn't unsee it. The little girl was 3 aisles over now, still touching her ear with that desperate, unconscious gesture that had haunted Sade for the last 15 minutes. The movement was so familiar it hurt. Iraq. Forward Operating Base Ramadi. A 19-year-old soldier named Patterson who kept tilting his head exactly like that, trying to relieve pressure no one else could see. Saad's heart hammered against her ribs as she turned the corner into the cereal aisle. 6 men in dark suits. The little girl in the lavender cardigan. And him. Park Sang-ho stood at the end of the aisle like a figure carved from stone, examining a box of imported Korean cereal with the same intensity most men reserved for weapons. Even in a grocery store surrounded by bright packaging and Saturday morning shoppers, he carried an atmosphere of violence. It clung to him like cologne. Saad took 3 steps forward. 2 bodyguards moved instantly. They weren't running. They didn't need to run. They simply materialized in her path, solid and immovable as walls. One was Korean, built like a freight truck. The other was white, lean and predatory. Both had their hands inside their suit jackets. "Stop right there, ma'am." The lean one's voice was polite, flat, final. Saad stopped. Her mouth went dry. She could see Park Sang-ho now 30 feet away, his head turning slowly toward the commotion. His eyes found her, and the temperature in the aisle seemed to drop 10 degrees. Those eyes were empty, calculating, the kind of eyes that had watched men die and felt nothing. Sade's voice cracked. She swallowed, tried again. "I need to speak to him. It's about his daughter." The bodyguards didn't move. The Korean one took a half-step closer, and Sade could see the bulge of a shoulder holster under his jacket. Behind them, Park Sang-ho was walking forward now, slow and deliberate, each footstep a countdown. "Ma'am, you need to leave." The lean bodyguard's hand was fully inside his jacket now. "I'm a medic." The words came out too fast, desperate. Sade forced herself to breathe, to sound professional, to channel every ounce of her military training. "I'm a former army medic. I served in Iraq, and I believe your daughter's condition might be treatable." Silence. The kind of silence that precedes violence. Park Sang-ho stopped 5 feet behind his bodyguards. Up close, he was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 5'9", but he radiated a presence that made size irrelevant. His suit was immaculate. His face was expressionless. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You think you know something about my daughter?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation wrapped in silk. Sade met his eyes, even though every survival instinct screamed at her to look away. "Yes, sir, I do. Every specialist in 3 countries has examined her." Park Sang-ho's voice never rose above conversation level, but there was razor-blade precision in each word. "Seoul National University Hospital, Tokyo Medical Center. Specialists in Zurich who charge more per consultation than you make in a year. They all said the same thing. Irreversible." "I know, but I saw—" "You saw." He took 1 step closer. The bodyguards tensed but didn't move. "You saw my daughter touching her ear in a grocery store, and you think you know better than the best doctors money can buy." Sade's heart was trying to break through her chest. She could feel sweat sliding down her spine. The lean bodyguard's hand was definitely on a weapon now. 10 feet away, she could see the little girl watching, her dark eyes wide and confused. This was the moment. Sade thought of her husband, Marcus, who'd always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing what needed to be done despite it. She thought of Patterson in Ramadi, how close they'd come to sending him home deaf when the solution had been so simple. "Sir, I treated a case like this in Iraq." Her voice was steadier now, stronger. "A soldier. Everyone thought it was blast-related hearing damage. Permanent. But it wasn't. It was a severe impaction, treatable. And your daughter, the way she's touching her ear, the specific pattern, the angle of her head tilt, it's identical. I could be wrong, but what if I'm not? The silence stretched out, thin and sharp. Park Sang-ho's eyes never left her face. He was reading her, dissecting her, weighing her words against a decade of disappointment and false hope and expensive failures. Behind him, Sade could see other shoppers at the far end of the aisle, oblivious to the tension crackling like electricity. The little girl took a small step toward her father, still touching her ear. Park Sang-ho looked at his daughter, then back at Sade. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, desperate in a way that made him suddenly, terrifyingly human. If you're lying to me, if this is some scheme, some attempt to— I'm not. Sade surprised herself with the force of her own conviction. I'm a widow. I work 2 jobs. I have nothing to gain from this except knowing I tried to help a child who's suffering. That's all. I swear to God. That's all. Another beat of silence. Then Park Sang-ho nodded once, sharp and decisive. Show me. Park Sang-ho stared at Sade Thompson for what felt like an eternity. The cereal aisle had gone completely silent. 6 bodyguards formed a semicircle around them, hands hovering near concealed weapons, eyes locked on the black woman who'd just done the impossible. Approached the ghost of Koreatown uninvited. Shoppers had scattered. A store manager watched from behind a display of breakfast bars, phone in hand, debating whether to call the police. Sade's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady, professional, the same tone she'd used in field hospitals when soldiers were bleeding out and panic meant death. Sir, I'm a former army medic. Combat deployment, Iraq. I've seen this before. Your daughter's symptoms, the way she touches her ear, the angle of her head tilt, the specific pattern of discomfort. It's identical to a case I treated in Ramadi. A soldier everyone thought had blast-related hearing damage turned out to be a severe impaction, treatable, reversible. Park Sang-ho's eyes were cold, calculating, dead eyes that had watched men beg for their lives. He said nothing, but Sade saw something flicker beneath the ice. Not hope. Hope was too dangerous for a man like him. But maybe curiosity, maybe desperation. Seo-jin stood beside her father, still touching her ear, still wincing. The girl looked up at Sade with dark, questioning eyes. I carry an otoscope in my bag, Sade continued, her words coming faster now. It's a habit from my medical days. Takes 30 seconds to check. If I'm wrong, you never see me again. But if I'm right— She stopped herself, didn't finish the sentence, couldn't promise miracles to a man who'd heard 1,000 promises shatter. Park Sang-ho glanced down at his daughter, watched her tiny hand press against her ear again, watched the pain cross her face. 10 years of this. 10 years of watching her suffer in silence. 10 years of the world's best specialists telling him there was nothing they could do. He spoke one word in Korean, sharp, commanding. The bodyguards stepped back, not far, just enough. You have 1 minute, Park Sang-ho said in English, his accent thick, his voice like gravel. You touch my daughter wrong. You don't leave this store. Sade nodded. Her hands were steady as she knelt beside Seo-jin, even though every nerve in her body screamed danger. She'd faced down insurgents in Fallujah, had performed triage under mortar fire, had held dying soldiers and promised them they'd see home again. But this moment, kneeling on a grocery store floor under the watch of a crime lord, felt more terrifying than any firefight. She pulled the otoscope from her bag, the familiar weight of it grounding her. Seo-jin watched, curious but uncertain. Sade signed slowly, carefully, the basic ASL she'd learned for communicating with hearing-impaired patients. I'm going to look in your ear. It won't hurt. I promise. Seo-jin looked to her father. Park Sang-ho signed something back, and the girl nodded. Sade gently tilted Seo-jin's head, positioned the otoscope, and looked into the child's right ear canal. What she saw made her breath catch. Jesus Christ! How had they missed this? How had world-renowned specialists, with their million-dollar equipment and 3-continent consultations, overlooked something this massive? The impaction was severe. Not just earwax, though there was plenty of that. Foreign material, probably from years ago, had created a plug that had calcified over time, creating what looked like permanent damage on surface-level scans. But it wasn't permanent. It was just stuck. Mr. Park, Sade said quietly, looking up at him. Your daughter doesn't have irreversible hearing loss. She has a severe impaction. It's been there so long it's created secondary blockage. The specialists probably saw scar tissue on their scans and assumed structural damage, but underneath, she paused. Her hearing mechanisms are intact. They've been intact this whole time. Park Sang-ho's face didn't change, but his hands did. They trembled, just slightly, just enough. You can fix this? His voice was barely above a whisper. I can start, Sade said. Right here, right now. I can remove the superficial layer. It'll give us confirmation. But she'll need a proper medical procedure, a specialist with the right tools to clear everything safely. Park Sang-ho looked down at his daughter, Seo-jin, who had lived 10 years in silence. Seo-jin, who would never hear her mother's name spoken aloud because her mother was dead before she could speak it. Seo-jin, who was all he had left in this violent, blood-soaked world. Do it, he said. Sade worked quickly, carefully, using a small curette from her med kit. She'd done this 100 times in field conditions, had cleared ear canals in dusty tents with generators roaring outside. Her hands knew the movements. Gentle pressure, precise angle, never force, never rush. She extracted a small portion of the blockage. Not much, just enough. And Seo-jin gasped. The sound cut through the silent store like a gunshot. The girl's eyes went wide, impossibly wide, and her hand flew to her ear, not in pain this time, but in shock. She gasped again, and this time Sade saw tears spilling down the child's face. Seo-jin was hearing her own breath, the sound of air moving through her lungs, the sound of her own voice making noise, the sound that had been locked away from her for 10 years. Park Sang-ho dropped to his knees. The most feared man in Koreatown, the ghost who made people disappear, the criminal empire builder who commanded respect through violence and terror. He fell to his knees in a grocery store cereal aisle and grabbed his daughter's face in his hands. Seo-jin, he whispered. Seo-jin. And the girl turned toward his voice. Actually turned. Her eyes found his, and there was something new in them. Recognition. Not of his face. She'd always known his face, but recognition of sound, of hearing, of the world opening up after a lifetime locked away. The ghost of Koreatown was crying, silent tears streaming down his face, his hands shaking as they held his daughter, his mouth forming words in Korean that Seo-jin was hearing for the first time in her life. Sade stood slowly, quietly, giving them space. The bodyguards watched, stunned. The store manager had lowered his phone. Somewhere in the distance, music played over the speakers, and Sade thought about how Seo-jin was probably hearing music for the very first time. 10 years of silence, broken in aisle 7 of a Los Angeles grocery store by a widowed army medic who almost walked away, who almost chose safety over courage, who almost let fear win. Almost. But not quite. 3 weeks later, Seo-jin sat in the audiologist's office at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, headphones covering her ears, her small hand gripping her father's with trembling fingers. The specialist adjusted the equipment one final time, and then it happened. a pure tone, soft at first, then clearer. Seo-jin's eyes went wide, her mouth opened. She looked at her father with an expression that shattered every wall Park Sang-ho had built around his heart in 10 years. She could hear, not partially, not damaged, fully, completely. The kind of hearing she should have had since birth. The kind of hearing that specialists across 3 continents said was impossible. The audiologist's hands shook as she read the results. Normal range, perfect response, a decade of silence erased by what should have been a routine medical procedure in any competent doctor's office. Park Sang-ho walked out of that medical building a different man. The ghost of Koreatown, the crime lord who'd orchestrated operations worth hundreds of millions, the man who made enemies vanish without trace, none of that mattered. His daughter heard birds, heard cars, heard his footsteps beside her, heard him breathe. He had to find Sade Thompson. His men located her within hours. She was finishing a double shift at the hospital, exhausted, still wearing her scrubs when Park Sang-ho's black Mercedes pulled up outside. She saw him through the window, stepped outside into the evening air, and for a moment they just stood there. The Mafia boss and the widow. 2 people who shouldn't exist in the same world. Park Sang-ho tried to speak, failed, tried again. His voice cracked. "You gave me back my daughter." Sade's eyes were gentle, tired but gentle. "I just did what any medic would do." "No." Park Sang-ho shook his head. "No. You did what no one else did. 10 years, millions of dollars, the best specialists in the world, and they all missed it. You saw it in 30 seconds. He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope. "I want to compensate you. Whatever you need, name it, anything." Sade looked at the envelope, didn't touch it. She'd seen enough of the world to know what was inside. Money. Probably more money than she'd make in 5 years. Maybe 10. She thought about her bills, her late husband's medical debt that still haunted her credit, the scholarships she couldn't afford for the nursing program she'd dreamed about. She thought about all of it. And then she said, "I don't want your money." Park Sang-ho blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I don't want money." Sade's voice was steady, firm. "If you want to do something that matters. My husband, Marcus, he died believing that service meant something, that helping people meant something. If you want to honor what happened, honor that." Park Sang-ho stood silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Tell me what you need." What Sade asked for, Park Sang-ho couldn't buy with a simple check. She wanted medical training programs, scholarships for combat medics transitioning to civilian healthcare, funding for community health initiatives in underserved neighborhoods. She wanted it done in Marcus Thompson's name. She wanted his memory to save lives. Park Sang-ho made it happen. Within 2 months, the Marcus Thompson Medical Foundation was operational, fully funded. Anonymous donors, shell corporations, money that couldn't be traced back to criminal enterprises but was clean, legal, and real. Park Sang-ho had spent his entire adult life building an empire of violence and fear. Now he was building something else, something that healed instead of destroyed. Sade became a presence in Seo-jin's life, not as an employee, not as someone Park Sang-ho paid to be there, as something more complicated and more real, a friend, a mentor, someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and keep going anyway. She taught Seo-jin about courage, about seeing things others missed, about how the smallest act of bravery could change the entire world. And Seo-jin, hearing every word now, absorbed it all with the fierce intelligence of a child who'd spent 10 years watching the world in silence. One evening, 3 months after that day in the grocery store, Park Sang-ho sat with his daughter on the penthouse balcony overlooking downtown Los Angeles. The sun was setting. The city stretched out below them in gold and amber light. Seo Jin was reading a book, headphones around her neck playing music softly, something she did constantly now, as if afraid the sound might disappear again. Park Sang-ho watched her. This miracle, this impossible gift, and for the first time in 10 years, he said the words out loud. "I love you, Seo Jin." His daughter looked up. Her eyes met his, and she smiled, that brilliant, heartbreaking smile, and said back to him in a voice he'd only heard in dreams, "I love you too, Daddy." Then she laughed, a real laugh, light and clear and absolutely perfect. The sound Park Sang-ho thought he'd never hear, the sound that made 10 years of silence worth enduring just to experience this single moment. Two broken families. One built on crime and loss, the other on sacrifice and survival. Both destroyed by tragedy. Both carrying grief that should have crushed them. They found healing in the most unlikely place. A grocery store cereal aisle. A widow's courage. A moment of seeing what everyone else overlooked. And in that seeing, everything changed. The ghost of Koreatown learned that some things couldn't be bought or threatened or controlled. Some miracles required vulnerability. Required strangers who cared more about a child's suffering than their own safety. Required women like Sadie Thompson, who looked at power and danger and chose courage anyway. Sod learned that heroism didn't always wear a uniform, that the medical oath she'd taken, to heal, to help, to do no harm, applied everywhere. Even in grocery stores, even when it terrified her. Even when the person she was helping came from a world she'd never understand. They were broken people, broken families, broken by loss and trauma and the weight of impossible burdens. But broken things, when brought together carefully, can create something stronger than they ever were alone. Something like healing, something like hope, something like the sound of a daughter's laugh echoing across a Los Angeles penthouse, filling a silence that had lasted far too long. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. Before you go, I'd love to ask you for a small favor. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me more than you can imagine and keeps these videos coming. The link is right below the video. Drop your location below. I want to know where my story family is watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it.